Hello, and welcome to the session on data sufficiency. Data sufficiency means finding out whether data is sufficient or not. Sufficient for what? Sufficient to answer a question. Any data sufficiency question will have a question followed by data statements. These data are the ones that the student needs to find out if they're enough to answer the question or not. So the possibilities are 1. Data is sufficient or data is insufficient. One of these will be the answer. But in a multiple choice question, only two choices do not suffice. So, in this chapter, we will discuss about the possible formats of questions and options. Look at the slide. Can you answer this question? Is x greater than 0? The answer is either yes or no. But what is x? Unless you know what is x, you will not be able to find out the answer. So here, data is insufficient. Now, let us have another piece of data. X square greater than 9. Now, can we find out the answer to this question? This statement gives the possibility that x is either greater than positive 3 or less than negative 3. Which one of these is the correct value? We do not know. There are many values that satisfy these criteria. Therefore, data is there, but it is still insufficient to answer the question correctly. It will provide both answers depending on what value you will choose from the available options. Suppose we get another piece of data, x greater than 3. Now we know the answer is yes, because anything that is more than 3 has to be more than 0. So we need to have the second piece of data only if we want to answer the question. The first data is of no use to us. Now, let us try to answer the question, is x equal to 3? Using two different statements. 1. X square equal to 9. Second, x greater than or equal to 3. Let us look at the first statement. It will give you two answers. X is either positive 3 or x equals minus 3. So, obviously, we cannot find out the answer. The second statement also gives us more than one answer. In fact, it gives us infinite options. But when we combine both statements, we can decide on one answer, that is x equal to 3. This makes it clear that data is enough to answer the question. As we already know, the DS question is a question followed by two data statements. We have to find out whether data given in those two statements is sufficient to answer the question or not. But as we know, these are multiple choice questions and we need to know what the choices are. Let us discuss the possibility of the options. It is quite clear that it cannot be two choices, sufficient or insufficient. So, what could those choices be? If you remember how we went about answering the questions, we first found out if the data in the first statement is enough or not. Then, we looked at the second statement irrespective of the first statement. Then we looked at the possibility of combining both statements, and finally, we decided in what form data is sufficient. That is, if statement 1 was enough, statement 2 was enough, or is it the combined force that is enough, or is it not enough at all? These will only constitute the options. Look at the way in which we will try and answer the question. We will look at the first statement and try to find out if data given in that statement is enough to answer the question. Then, we look at the second statement and find out if data given is enough to answer the question or not. This will be done irrespective of whether you get enough data to answer the question or not from the first statement. If data given in both statements are not enough independently, we take them up together and find out if both pieces of data together is enough to answer the question or not. Even after that, if we cannot find enough data to answer the question, it is deemed that data given is insufficient to answer the question. So the options logically would be given as 1. Can answer using information 1 alone. 2. Can answer using information 2 alone. 3. Can answer using information in both statements. 4. Can answer using information 1 alone and information 2 alone. 5. Cannot answer the question using even both the statements. Depending on which one of these conditions is satisfied, the option number will be marked as the answer in the answer sheet. So, if the option answer using information 1 alone is correct, then the option corresponding to that condition will be marked as the answer in the answer sheet. These are the possible conditions. These conditions can be jumbled in various ways into options A, B, C, D, E or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as per the exam setter's choice. Now, let us look at an example. Refer question Q3. Q3 runs like this. Does my house have more than 4 floors? Statement 1. My house has a fire alarm system. Statement 2. Every house with more than 4 floors will have a fire alarm system. Mark the answer according to the options that we discussed before. 1. Can answer using information 1 alone. 2. Can answer using information 2 alone. 3. Can answer using information in both statements. 4. Can answer using information 1 alone and information 2 alone. 5. Cannot answer the question even using both the statements. Now, let us clearly understand the statements. The first one is very clear. The second one is the problem. It states that each and every house with more than 4 floors will have a fire alarm system. It does not say that houses with less than 4 floors will not have a fire alarm system. Anybody with the fear of fire in his house can fix a fire alarm system even if it has less than 4 floors. Hence, we cannot be sure that there are more than 4 floors in my house. This shows that we need to be very careful in reading the statements. The answer is option 5. Refer the next question Q4. What is the area of the rectangle PQRS whose perimeter is 40 centimeters? Statement A, PQ equal to 18 centimeters. Statement B, RS equal to 12 centimeters. Mark your answer as A if statement A alone is sufficient and statement B alone is not sufficient to answer the question. Option B, if statement B alone is sufficient and statement A alone is not sufficient to answer the question. Option C, if statement A and B together are sufficient but neither statement alone is sufficient to answer the question. Option D, if each statement alone is sufficient to answer the question. And finally, option E, if even both statements A and B together are not sufficient to answer the question. We know that the perimeter of a rectangle is 2 into length plus breadth. Now, we know the perimeter of the rectangle from the given question. So, In order to find out the area, which we know is length into breadth, we just need to get one side of the rectangle. If we get one side and the perimeter, we can find out the other side. If we get both the sides, we can get the area. In the first piece of information, we get one side. Therefore, we can get to the answer. In the second statement, we get one side. So, the second statement also yields an answer. In short, we can get the answer to the question if we get any of these statements. So, the answer to the question is option D. Here, it is very important to read when to mark what answer. Then only can we mark D as the answer. Options A and B are partially correct. So, if we do not read the directions in its entirety, then we might end up marking the wrong answer. Now, having got the answer, try drawing the rectangle PQRS. PQ equal to 18, RS equal to 12. Can we draw a rectangle like that? Absolutely not, because opposite sides of a rectangle have to be same in length. So, is the question wrong? What is the correct answer? Here is where we have to understand data sufficiency properly. When we look at the first statement, we look at it independently from the second statement. When we look at the second statement, we look at it independent of the first statement. Only if it is required will we combine the two statements. Only if it is required will we combine the two statements. Therefore, here there is no need to combine the statements at all. The question is correct and the answer is D. Now, look at the question Q5. On what day of the week does 26th January of year X fall? Statement A. 1st April of the year was a Sunday. Statement B. The year X is a leap year. Mark your answer as 1 if statement B alone is sufficient and statement A alone is not sufficient to answer the question. 2. If statement A alone is sufficient and statement B alone is not sufficient to answer the question. 3. If each statement alone is sufficient to answer the question. 4. If statement A and B together are sufficient, but neither statement alone is sufficient to answer the question. 5. If even both statements A and B together are not sufficient to answer the question. Do one thing. Look carefully at the options in question number 5 and question number 4. Try and find out if there are differences in the options. That is the first step to understanding DS properly. Here, 1st April is a Sunday. It means we can count back and find out the day for 26th January. Hey, there's a problem. February will have 28? Or is it 29 days? That is the crux of the problem here. Only when it is clear can we find out what day is 26th January. That is made clear in the second statement. So, individually, both statements are of no use, but together they make us get enough data to answer the question. So, the answer to this question is option 4. Note here that the option is 4 and not D. That is the importance of reading the directions. Again, the standard format of both the statements together option being option 3 or option C is also discarded here. Were you not careful, you could so easily have marked C or D, whereas the correct answer would be 4. Note such things very carefully while attempting DS questions. It is very easy to score marks in DS, but it is equally easy to lose marks. You need to have high concentration while attempting DS questions because a small lapse in reading the questions will make sure that your answer is wrong. Therefore, there are certain things that you need to be sure of when you attempt DS questions. They are: 1. Read the instructions before the DS set carefully. DS questions normally come as a set of 3 or 5 questions, and for all these put together will be one set of directions. It is very important to read this because how to answer the set is given in this. What option to mark under what condition will be given here only. So, unless you read this set carefully, it is not possible to answer the questions properly. 2. Read the question itself very carefully. Unless we understand the question properly, it will be very difficult to answer it. Point number 3. Data is sufficient only if it results in a unique answer. Unique means one and only one answer. Remember the example where we got two values for x as plus 3 and minus 3 and still we considered it not to be sufficient. Point number 4. Use only normal knowledge. Exceptional general knowledge should not be used in DS questions. Attempt the questions as if a layman does. Let us look at an example to illustrate this. Is white the best reflector of light? The reflection index of white is 0.56. The greater the reflection index, the better the reflection capacity. If we get a DS question like this, the answer from a layman's perspective is data insufficient. But scientific knowledge will tell you that white reflects light the most. So, you should not use that knowledge as that is something that only science graduates know. At the same time, information that everybody should know will be applicable. You cannot say multiplication is science and so I do not know it. All common things can be used. Point number 5. DS questions ask you whether data given in the statements is enough to find out the answer or not. So the answer need not be found out. You need to be sure that you can find out the answer. That is enough. Remember the second example, is x equal to 3? If instead of that, the question was, what is x to the power 4 plus 23x cube plus 243x square plus 467x plus 789? Still, we need to find out the value of x only because the unique value of x will yield a unique value for the equation also. Hence, we need to just find x. It is not necessary to find out the value of the actual equation since it is sure that we will get there. We are sure that we will get the answer once we get to x. So, we can answer the question. That information is enough for the DS question. The most common mistakes that students make while doing DS questions are: 1. Careless reading of the questions and the instructions. If the instructions and the question are not understood properly, then there are possibilities that you will make a mistake in answering the questions. The second mistake that people make is applying self-acquired knowledge in attempting the questions and analyzing the data. You should resist this temptation and attempt the questions using data given in the questions only. The next thing that students do is spending more time to reach the answer. You should not do this mistake. Size up the question and in case you do not know the answer, leave it and proceed. Spend time on a question only if you are relatively sure to get to the answer. DS questions are seemingly very easy. Therefore, there is a fair possibility that there will be lapses in concentration as and when we see DS questions. That is a cardinal mistake. Always remember the things that we discussed here in terms of how we make mistakes. Abide by those principles and be careful lest you make mistakes with these kinds of questions. Remember, DS questions are very easy. It is easy to score marks in data sufficiency, but it is even easier to lose marks. All the best.